I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at Manchester City versus Dortmund in the Champions League. And before we start, check out the membership offer in the description below. Every member gets exclusive content, write-ups of all the videos and tactical analysis, and they also will be receiving a free copy of my book when it comes out. And I'm looking to get that out in about a month. This video is going to be made using Keyframe, so the link for that will be in the description again below. So be sure to check those things out because they're really cool, really exciting stuff's happening behind the scenes. So let's get right into the video now. Manchester City built out of the back with two central defenders and Kyle Walker as an asymmetric right back, complementing the double pivot created by the inverted fullback Cancelo. And then between the lines we had De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva, and Gundogan. So this, in the first half, created a double pivot and a three attacking midfield for Manchester City, and Dortmund looked to counter this using a 4-5-1 or a 4-2-3-1 that would then compact into a 4-5-1. So here we have our midfielders, and Reus typically stayed a little bit higher for transition purposes, and with Haaland as the main center forward. Four defenders for Dortmund to then try and protect Manchester City's threat in behind. Manchester City played with a false nine, so that meant that the width was just held by the wingers and sometimes players fanning out into the wide areas. And what we can see that from that, for players fanning out into the wide areas, it was mostly players like Gundogan who were attacking midfielders in higher, more advanced positions. They would then come into the wide area and create dual width to then free up some movement and take advantage of the low density space in the wide area. And then these three advanced players in the midfield were also very interchangeable and fluid. Now we can talk about the first line of build-up, which we saw take up a few different forms, the first of which was the relationship of two narrow central midfielders, which looked to then free up some space on the weak side or for the advancing ball-playing center defender, but with two narrow players with more vertical or slightly diagonal connections, the free space would then be with Walker to drive forward through the half space or the interior part of the wide corridor. So now we have the second build-up structure that Manchester City used, which was an asymmetric back three with Kyle Walker coming deeper, and he typically always came deeper in the first half to collect the ball because it created a better field of vision for him to then see his forward passing options and to take his momentum towards the attacking players. But from here we had the staggering between the two players, and Rodri held his position, so Cancelo staggered himself between two central defenders, and Rodri held his position to then free up the half space for Kyle Walker. And then between the lines we had our false nine, Bernardo Silva, play just a little bit deeper, which allowed the attacking midfielders to make more advanced runs between defenders and to pin the back four or manipulate the defense to create these spaces for players like Kyle Walker much better. So now when Kyle Walker would advance the ball, this was true for primarily either side Manchester City looked to advance the ball through, but the mutual help space would then shrink in size and the connections would become tighter just to establish a positional structure around the ball to maintain control and look for penetrating passes into advanced areas through one of the three attacking midfielders that we have in these positions. So from here, this could elicit a defender to jump from Dortmund, or they could create space elsewhere, or they could drag Borussia Dortmund to one side to then circulate it or take advantage of the weak side as well. And we'll see in the second half how things changed and how Manchester City changed their shape to do things a little differently, primarily with the fullbacks. One more noteworthy build-up shape of Manchester City was their typical asymmetry and their staggering of their two double pivots. So their double pivots were higher, obviously, but playing between each of the defenders in the first line of build-up. And what this did was it looked to pull the Dortmund players out while maintaining a strong circulation structure and then access the space in between the lines. But I felt Manchester City actually created more dangerous spaces between the lines of Dortmund in the second half when they moved Cancelo into a wider position and went with a more natural 4-3-3, which we'll talk about in a minute. So from here, the last situation that we're going to talk about from Manchester City is with their back four here. Walker's just a bit deeper, but we'll see just the staggering of Rodri, Cancelo, and the two central defenders. So we see the staggering and the asymmetry in their build-up and the variations they can use to then manipulate the space and create passing options going forward. But here, just noteworthy to show the different ways they can use the half spaces through Cancelo now, going a little bit wider, but still maintaining his double pivot attribute. And then we have, of course, the players in front of him, the attacking midfielders, with the wingers and the midfielders of Dortmund. And the wingers often played very vertical in comparison to their central midfielders on the same vertical line, but this was just in result of the Manchester City movement. So here in the second half, just one picture, we had Cancelo play much wider, creating a natural back four with slightly narrow fullbacks, but still occupying the wide corridor, creating dual width with their wingers. And we still at times had three attacking midfielders between the lines. With Gabriel Jesus coming on, they had a more natural forward who did stay a little bit higher, but they still did have their three attacking midfielders at times. And the Dortmund players, we can highlight the Dortmund shape and their 4-5-1. We clearly see it here. And what Manchester City did that affected Dortmund to make them just a little bit more clear in their defensive structure is with the wide fullbacks. Then this created a more natural reference point for Dortmund and forced them to defend across the full width of the field now in the first line. So when the players would jump out to address the ball, this would then create more space between the lines for players like Gundogan, as we see here. He already has more space, just from the few clips we've seen so far, than in prior situations. So this was a good tactical move, but also maybe left them a little bit more vulnerable. But we'll see in their final third, the rest defense, how the fullbacks interacted to make sure this wasn't an issue. So again, we see the Dortmund 4-5-1, and one key situation to look for is the jumping of the midfielder. Again, with the wider fullbacks, this gave a little bit more space at times for the central defenders to jump, which sparked the interior midfielders of Dortmund to then be attracted to the ball, then creating space between the lines for, again, Gundogan just off your screen here, and creating more situations like this going forward through the half spaces. So now, looking at the rest defense structure, we had a more typical structure that was similar to Manchester City's shape last year, with the fullbacks coming just a bit narrow while still maintaining some width but also putting them in a good spot to transition, and with two central defenders covering in behind to really protect against any offensive transitions from Dortmund. So now, looking at Manchester City's first goal, we see their clear defensive shape. We have a back four, four-man midfield with slightly higher wingers, and two forwards, or 1-9 and a 10. So what this happened now was they used their cover shadows effectively to cut off the ball. They looked to control space between the lines through compactness and using their cover shadows, limiting the options the player on the ball has. And what Dortmund did was they created the width through their fullbacks, as we see here. The wide players are the Dortmund fullbacks here and here, which gave Manchester City a lot of room to transition into when they won the ball because of their narrow wingers between the lines and more narrow. So these attacking midfielders and inverted wingers then resulted in Manchester City having numbers going forward when they did win the ball in transition. So now we just look at the Manchester City winger Mahrez using his cover shadow to block the pass into the wide area, and then we can see the players that will be effectively involved in transition, which will turn into a 4 against 3, and having the cover of two holding midfielders behind them. And then we can even see the amount of players that Dortmund have between the lines and then would ultimately be behind the ball. When Manchester City win it, again, good off the ball running from the forward, but we have the wide players playing through the half space, taking advantage of the width that the two central defenders of Dortmund can't cover because of the run from the most advanced Manchester City player, the forward. He makes a narrow run between the two center backs, which narrows them enough to then give his wide players the space to look to run in behind. They run in behind and go around the two central defenders, which will ultimately lead them to scoring their first goal. So now, looking at the closer look at the Dortmund structure, we have our wide fullbacks, our typical back four, as we see. Then we have our midfield three-man midfield. And then we would see Reus come more narrow, Haaland playing through the center, and then a little bit of asymmetry with their front three as their right winger stayed a little bit wider and varied his movement, whereas Reus primarily always inverted. So here we can see the fullback in the wide area creating width for Dortmund, as well as the players coming narrow, which was Marco Reus and their advanced midfielder, as well as their other attacking midfielder with their winger arriving late on the far side. So they commit a lot of players forward when they break the Manchester City defense. They have their two attacking midfielders quite narrow and Marco Reus just behind Haaland, and creating this asymmetry puts them with greater number of players in advanced areas when attacking and when breaking lines. So just a situation again showing the wide fullbacks, the one holding midfielder, and the narrow wingers, which would then give Dortmund's fullbacks a large amount of space in the wide areas to then receive the ball and pick out an offensive action. So from here, clear as day, we have our three-man midfield, and then Haaland and Reus playing quite narrow, with on this right side again a bit more asymmetry in how they built from the back against Manchester City's 4-4-2. And then we can see how the Dortmund goal came with one variation of their build-up. Emre Can drops between the two central defenders. This puts Daoud as the holding midfielder, and with Reus playing narrow, we have our 3 advanced area options. I felt this structure was better suited to break down Manchester City because it put advanced options between each midfield connection of Manchester City, and when the wide players would go to press, the Manchester City wide players would go and press the fullbacks. It would then leave gaps through the center, and it might give Haaland more opportunity to run behind if a defender were to jump to these connections. So the goal came from Reus inverting, and came in slightly of a transition moment too, so keep that in mind. But Reus is inverted. The player Haaland will be the third man, linking the ball to Reus, who's then running in behind, as we see it happening here. Haaland receives the pass, the initial pass, and then is able to lay it through into the path of Reus, who then takes a good touch and puts in the finish. So that's the analysis, everyone. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.